Good afternoon, everyone. Wonderful to be with you again. Really excited to be here and to touch on our poetry part one. Literature is something so special, and I think that we really need to see that we are in touch with it every single day. I'm Mrs. Swart, and I'll be taking us through this lesson today. So, what is poetry? Well, we do things like tell a story, or the description of a scene or emotion, or it even conveys an idea through verse. It doesn't have to rhyme. Usually you say something that rhymes and you say, "Ooh, I'm a poet and I don't know it." But it doesn't have to rhyme. There's quite a bit to still learn about poetry, but I'm going to just touch on the basics. And lines do not need to be the same length. Usually it's a more compact form of literature than prose. Remember, prose is written in paragraphs and they're usually written from margin to margin. So more or less, every time you get something that looks slightly different, it could be poetry. Now, you might just think, but I don't know much about poetry. But remember, guys like Eminem have been using poetry for a long time. He is, at this stage, still, and I Googled it, he's still the #1 rapper. So now we know that rapping is also poetry. When we analyze a poem, we actually don't have to read the poem yet. When we start, what's the first thing you do? You read the title and you think, I wonder what this is about. I think that's what this poem's going to be about. And then you look at the form or the structure of the poem. And we'll look at form and structure soon. Seen versus unseen poems. A seen poem is simply a poem that you study in class, and then you will learn about the background of the poet, and that will be influential in the study of the poem. Or the poems that you do for seen poems, you always find out about the background of the poet. So that helps you a lot as well. It gives you an idea of why they might have written it, what it might be about, things like that. An unseen poem in a test or exam, you have no background knowledge of the poet's background at all. So you are going to interpret the content of the poem only. Whatever you read there, you are going to analyze that, unless you might have an idea about the poet. Maybe you've heard about the poet before. Maybe you do Maya Angelou and you know a little bit about her, or Wilfred Owen, who wrote war poems. Then that will help you as well. But an unseen poem, generally, you don't know anything about the poet. So you then interpret the content of the poem only, and you have to make sense of that. Now, we anticipate something from the poem. We look at the title and then we try and figure out, we think, what does this title tell us about the poem? What does it disclose? And you get an idea of what you expect it to be about. Now, sometimes we're wrong. There's a poem called Death in Detention. And when you read it, the first thing everyone thinks is, sure, shame, the poor child must have died in detention at school. But it's not that at all. It is about death in detention in the apartheid years, when someone was kept illegally away from his family and without necessarily being charged. So sometimes the title is a bit misleading. The form or the structure, it has to do with the number of lines this poem is offering. It has to do with the number of stanzas. Remember, we don't speak of paragraphs, we speak of stanzas. It can be the rhyme scheme when we look at the last word in each line. That type of poem, it could be a sonnet. Sonnets are 14 lines, but not all poems of 14 lines are sonnets. It depends on whether they meet the criteria for a sonnet. And then, can you recognize any figurative language even before you've actually read the poem? A quatrain is 4 lines, a sestet is 6 lines, and an octet 8 lines. Now, sestet and octet we usually refer to in a sonnet. Some people speak of an octave, but to me, I associate an octave with music. And then we have quite a few figures of speech that you've already learned and referred to in the past. There's some examples there. When you're going to read the poem, you do not read the poem line by line, unless the punctuation mark is at the end of every line. You read from punctuation mark to punctuation mark so that you understand what the poet is saying. Vocabulary is to do with your new words. And then what is the poet saying? That is usually the message. It's the summary of the poem. And the message could be literal or figurative. Sometimes it's a straightforward literal poem, but very often there's a figurative meaning, and that is what we try to find out. A theme. When we think of a theme, it tells us what the poem is about, the central idea. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes not so obvious. I always suggest you try to sum the poem up in maybe one word. It might be about love. It might be about kindness. It might be about war. Then that could be the theme of the poem. But it could also be that you would actually use more words to describe or mention what the theme is. And of course, you have to prove what the theme is about so that you can make sure you can justify. And you're going to look at format structure then, your poetic techniques, and take notes and have questions and answers. Now, there may be more than one poetic device in a line. I've given you an example here. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. So we have assonance and simile. That's why you need to know when you speak of a sound device, because a sound device will be assonance. But if they just ask you a figure of speech, then you would be able to say either one of the two. Now, when we look at a simple poem like Mary Had a Little Lamb, and we're not going to really discuss it now, I just want to point out a few features of the poem. We look at the title. What is it about? Simply, Mary had a little lamb. It tells us what it's about. So even when we've read the poem, we know that that is what it is about. It's telling us about this girl who has this lamb. When we look at the rhyme scheme here, we look at the last word of each line. Now look very carefully. Snow and go rhyme, but they're not necessarily spelled the same, but it doesn't matter as long as they rhyme. Now, in some of these rhymes, these nursery rhymes, they have rules. They say which was against the rules, but then it wouldn't rhyme with school, not properly anyway. But if you just say, in this version that says rule and school, they rhyme. So yeah, we have 2 quatrains. So it's 2 stanzas, and they are 4 lines each. Now, when you answer in an exam, you can't say, oh, you know, there are 8 lines in the poem, there are 2 quatrains. You're telling me exactly the same thing. So you would have to find more to tell us about to get us the structure. And the rhyme scheme here is A, B, C, B, D, E, G, E. Now, remember what I always tell you. I think you're getting tired of hearing it, but I want you to remember that we have to do our quiz. And I want you to try the quiz because it's very important to make sure you understand what we're speaking about here. But what we'll do is for the next lesson, I almost said tomorrow's lesson, but tomorrow there's no lesson, only on Monday again. We will look at poetry further. We will look at an example of a poem so that we can make sure that you understand how to look at the poem, how to analyze it. So you are now going to click on the link below to complete the exercise, or you can use the QR code. And thank you so much for all of those who've tried the quizzes over the time period that we've been busy. It's very exciting to see how you're improving and that you're learning from this, because that is what we really want you to do. So good luck with the quiz and try your very best, because I know you can get this right. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.